I think we're live. Are we live? We're live.
Hey!
Yay! Hi, everybody. Hope you're all doing marvelously well. We hit it at exactly 11 a.m. here, but I'm sure there's like a 20-second delay or something like that. Eric is nodding that there is a delay and that, oh, I see us coming on now. Okay. Hi, everybody. Hello, Ron. All right, I'm going to turn myself down on... Okay, cool. I'm hearing oh, hey, Mark. Hey, Michael. Hi, Matt. Yes, and nothing's nothing. Yes, please like and share. That would be good. That lets the whole of the YouTube world know that we're actually online. So anyway, I'm sitting here with my friend, Mr. Jerry Hammack, who I already have one book of. How are you, Jerry?
Doing good, Warren. Good to see you again.
Good. We actually only have been talking for like 1 minute. We haven't had the hour because I'm all running from one thing to another. This is his last book. For those of you that haven't yet got the first book, here it is.
And
it is recording. It's the Beatles Recording Reference Manual, Volume 1, My Bonnie Through Beatles for Sale, 61 to 64. So the question is, young sir, what is Volume 2? Tell us about it.
It looks like something exactly like this.
Yep.
And it covers Help Through Revolver, 1965 through 1966. So picks up where the last one left off. And if you bookend them, you'll see why I am breaking up this series.
Oh yeah,
it's we're up to close to 900 pages between the two books now. So yeah,
it's amazing.
Yeah, and it's a great period in their development. They're having the last little tastes of Beatlemania, and they're getting fatigued from it. With Help, they move into the beginning of their more mature songwriting phases with Rubber Soul, and then full on What Can the Studio Do for Me with Revolver, and that's all covered in Volume 2. That's
amazing. Well, it's really, really cool because yes, there's comments coming up like Mark Peacock just said, the golden years. I mean, I think for me, and I think all of our development, because it's so great because we're all Beatles fans, especially if you're recording. If you're a recording person, you know, we all know that whether you're the world's biggest Beatles fan or not is not actually as important as the fact that bands like the Beatles, bands like the Beach Boys, these kind of artists pioneered recording techniques. So it's a wonderful thing. It's like allows us the opportunities to not just talk about a great band with great songs and great singers and great musicians, but it allows us to talk about recording. So that's why it's very exciting for me.
Yeah, you know, as we've talked about previously, it's where it was born. It was born with solving problems going into the studios, problems that clients would bring, wanting to have those classic sounds and having to sort out how to bring that to life with the tools that I had available to me, but also understanding how the Beatles bring it to life. And yeah, that was the genesis of this, and we wanted to answer those kind of questions and understand it. And it's endlessly fascinating to me to go through and start to get a grip on what they did to make these songs come to life.
Absolutely. And gentlemen and ladies, if you see me looking down, it's because I'm reading off questions and following the stuff there. I'm not ignoring Jerry. Somebody said to me, it looks like you're ignoring Jerry last time. I was like, there's a whole bunch. You see me looking down? I'm reading off the questions.
Yeah, they were seeing my heart break live.
Yeah, somebody said, you can see, I can't remember what it was. Somebody said, Jerry looks disappointed that Warren is ignoring him or something like that. Well, it's just... Unless maybe I could get one of those screens that, you know, that has the questions coming over the top of the camera.
No.
I think doesn't Glenn has one of those, doesn't he? Glenn Fricker. Yeah, and they project over so you can read it while looking into the camera. I should get something fancy like that.
Teleprompter.
Zach said, who are the Beatles? Are they a new boy band? Yes, they are.
They were to start.
Without going on too much of a tangent, they were the first boy band. They really were. They were the first boy band. I mean, they were obviously they became so much more than that, but let's not forget, you know, their initial appeal was the fact that they were, I think George was still a teenager and the rest of them were in their early 20s. I mean, you know, they spoke to Boys and girls, they really were. Anyway, all right, Zach. That was a good point there. So I remember specifically, now you're starting obviously with Help, so I don't want to gloss over that. And I do remember Help, and the movie's incredible, and there's everything about it. But Rubber Soul for me, as a kid, as an engineer, as a producer, a mixer, all that stuff, songwriter, whatever, Rubber Soul is really, like, for me, a huge step up creatively. I mean, it's sonically one of their best sounding records. It still sounds massive in speakers, like so well recorded. That was Norman Smith, is that correct?
Norman Smith was still working on Rubber Soul. Exactly. Yeah, he was ending his tenure. I believe Emmerich was assisting him a lot of the time during those sessions. Yeah, it is a terrific sounding album. It's an unusual album in the way that it was treated in the mix, especially in the stereo version, where Martin made the choice of hard left, hard right panning with the band versus the vocals. I think for musicians or musically minded people, when they discovered that they could take their pan on their speaker and isolate out the vocals and isolate out the backing tracks, is like a revelation. And that was just a creative choice that they made for the stereo mixes. I think later on, Martin questioned himself for making that decision. But yeah, it's a terrific sounding album. It certainly demonstrates their growth as songwriters. It shows a real restraint in the approach to the orchestration and arrangement of the songs. So all of those things add up. And then the songwriting as you get to Rubber Soul is just it starts to give you a hint of what's to come.
That's really fantastic. I don't know. I remember the story goes that Norman was in a contract dispute, and that's how, because he was unionized or whatever the right phrase is. I'm not going to say union's negative. I didn't mean it like that. He was in a union, and that was how Jeff got the sort of upgrade to engineer on Revolver. And is that entirely true, or is that an oversimplification?
Well, my understanding was that he wanted out of the engineer's chair and into the producer's chair.
Oh, I see.
And he wanted to develop his own acts. He didn't want to continue to develop the Beatles for George Martin, and so this gave him a chance to move on. And I don't want to misspeak, but I believe he brought Pink Floyd into the studio.
I'd read that, yes.
Yeah, so that's my understanding. Was he was looking for the next big opportunity for him, having done the lead engineering gig for as long as he could tolerate it.
That's amazing. So somebody just said a minute ago, what obscure mics? Was there any obscure mics used on Rubber Soul? Because we always know about the AKG D19. We hear about that every day. Yep. We always know about U48s and U47s and KM56s. Yep. Those come up all the time, and 53s, of course, KM53s. Anything unusual about it, recording-wise, that maybe somebody didn't know?
Well, they were still using I believe for a period during, and without going and folks, why I write this stuff down is there's a lot to remember, but without going into those notes, I believe they were still using the STC 4038s on the bass cabinet, and I don't know that they had abandoned it for the kick drum yet, in favor of the D12, the AKG D12. So that's the STC is a pretty obscure little mic, but it found a lot of use in Beatles sessions and a lot of use in low frequency work. Right.
And what about the D30? Wasn't that around? And the D20?
D20 later on. They were D12 and D20 that they used. D20 was I think came in '67. I think it started getting wider use. And
We're
again,
about
without
we're about to release, for those of you that are Beatles fans, you're going to love this. We're about to release, what are we aiming for next Tuesday, young Eric? For the Clay Bear one?
Yeah.
He's smiling at me like, oh no. Basically, we went to Clay's studio, and I'd love to talk to you more about this as well, maybe after the fact, and we can incorporate it into a future talk. We went to Clay Blair's studio, which is the old producer's workshop, and we recorded Come Together using all of the same mics, as near as darn it. In fact, we did use all of the same mics. We used the Chandler mic pre's to emulate that, and it was pretty remarkable. And Clay's a great guy. Everybody's going to enjoy it. Now, it's not going to be exactly the same. We didn't have the tape machine. We didn't have, John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr, but we did have Clay, who's a wonderfully talented guy and also a sweetheart, play it and record it. And so that's going to be a lot of fun for those of you that are hardcore Beatles fans and just want to know a bit more about the recording and the performance aspect of it. But that was a D20 on the kick, I believe. And a lot. The one thing I must ask you about this. The one thing that Clay did that he showed me was, and I didn't know this, and that shows you how naive I am. They had the towels, the tea towels on the toms, but they mic'd the tom underneath.
Yeah, well, now there's photo evidence from '66 that show in the Revolver sessions, starting with the Revolver sessions, that has Emmerich using a lot more microphones. So by '69, when you're working on Abbey Road, certainly there's a lot of microphones in play and a lot of underdrum miking that was going on. Those were getting summed, of course. They were still working with limited. Well, they were doing better with the TG 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 board, which was I think a 20-in board, but they were still doing a lot of summing of the mic signals prior to going into the board. And even to Come Together, Ringo only got one track of drums, even though they're summing, 8 or 9 microphones at the time. Right. But there's a load of, at that point, there's the D20 and then the D19's like everywhere.
Right. Yeah, I think there was, I can't remember, how many D19s did we have on that kit? There was one under each tom. One overhead. Yeah. I can't remember. There was quite a few.
And then Emmerich would do 2 microphones on the floor tom, above the floor tom. And I'm not sure if what he was doing by that was to get an extra focus on the floor tom, or if he was using it to get some ambience from the ride cymbal.
Right.
But yeah. Once from out under the thumb of Norm Smith, Jeff enjoyed his microphones. There's no doubt about it.
Jeff, and now of course, I mean that's commonplace. Even when I recorded at Abbey Road, we still ended up with kick, snare, 2 overheads, tom mics, only tops. But the interesting thing is, and it's very, very typical of. Very typical of the way I grew up recording in the UK was to not use a hi-hat mic or use a hi-hat mic sparingly. When we did the phrase stuff there, for instance, this is in Abbey Road, we lost a hi-hat mic. And it's funny because when I was mixing it, you could hear they would always have a mic running in the control room printing. Mm-hmm. So you could hear the head engineer at the time go, or the assistant saying to the head engineer, "Oh, we've lost the hi-hat mic," and the engineer goes, "That's okay. It's only the hi-hat mic." So I think
those super high frequencies cut pretty well. It's nice to have. And, we always want nowadays, we want as much control as possible over that balance. And it's nice to have that. But, I get it a little bit in, putting myself in the headspace of an engineer in the 60s is, we got enough hi-hat coming off, or we got enough hi-hat in the snare and on the overhead. Why would we need a specific mic for that?
Yeah, definitely. I'm trying to sift through. There's some Beatles questions here, but there's a whole other conversation going on about speakers and stuff like that. Maybe you guys should exchange email and then you can talk about that. It's funny. I'm glad though. I'm glad there's a great community of people helping each other. But it's let me scroll back and see if I can get into the Beatles questions. Okay. Paul Lucas says, do you know why Not Guilty was left off the Beatles album?
Yeah, time. You're working with vinyl, you have a fixed running time per side. And so when you're making a choice between what's the quality of song plus the running time going on, then, Not Guilty didn't make the cut. Now, why did Revolution 9 make the cut? Because it was John's song. So, George was never in the driver's seat as far as the allocation of songs to a record. But the short answer is in LP production you have a fixed running time, and it can't be exceeded. And so if any combination of songs didn't allow for that, then the song would get bumped. And again, if you're weighing out, what am I going to... Actually, I did this with people on my Facebook feed, which was a kick. I said, Martin always talked about a one-album white album, the Beatles, a one-album white album. So what do you cut? Come back to me with 14 tracks, a pre-traditional allocation for a Beatles album. Come back to me with 14 tracks, and what's your white album look like? And what comes back is really kind of interesting. People that are biased toward the more, Mother Nature's Son sort of stuff going on, and people that want, all the heavy hitting stuff, the Helter Skelter and all that kind of thing. So,
well, for me, and this is just personal, for me, even though there's a larger proportion of Paul songs by then, and they're all amazing. For me, the songs that stick in my mind are Dear Prudence and Cry Baby Cry. Mm-hmm. And those to me are like the two masterpieces, or Happiness is a Warm Gun.
Yeah, Happiness is a Warm Gun is crazy. And that's not an edit. That's a performance. They
amazing.
Played that thing with 3 different time signatures?
That's incredible.
It's just crazy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, I was going to just comment.
Please.
One of the themes of the Beatles' work is they played it.
Right.
They played it together. They performed it. They did obviously enhance it significantly through overdubs, but they performed those songs.
Jeff's a good friend of mine, and he asked this question. He says, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on Bernard Purdy's claim that he played on a lot of the later albums in overdub session. Is there anything to these claims? There is actually a video online. I can't remember his name. He's one of the Beatles guys, and he's very credible. And he does a very, very good job of analyzing the claims and actually substantiating what is real and what is not real. Basically, and you can find this out, and I don't want to have a fight with people on it, but you can find it out that the early Capitol recordings, and I believe it was like the Silver Beatles stuff, the very early stuff, came over here, and it was actually after the initial albums were released here, early to mid-period, and there was overdubs done to the old recordings, and you can hear them. You can hear these obscure Capitol. They're now disappeared, but you can find them, and you can hear drums overdubbed on them. But those weren't any of the later albums, and unfortunately for poor old Bernard Purdy, it's some of the songs that he claims to have played on, and it's probably his recollection, and the guy's an incredible drummer, the stuff with Steely Dan. I don't want to be negative. Unfortunately, some of those things are actually filmed in the studio, so it's pretty hard to say you played on it when there's like Ringo playing on the track, especially White Album period, or or Let It Be and all of that stuff, where you can watch watch Ringo playing on it. And,
Well,
I think the reason why the Beatles themselves don't stay out of it is because they don't want to give it any real credence.
Yeah, and there's a couple more pieces of evidence that would almost globally dispute that. One's obviously just the tail of the tape. We have the tape logs. We know the progression of the songs in the studio, and they had to progress a certain way in order to turn out the way they did. You can't reinsert yourself into a tape reduction remix. It isn't happening, and it's certainly not happening in 1967. So that's a huge aspect of it. Another is as you're probably aware, Warren, the machine biases were completely different. So the tapes, you're not going to just fly the master tapes over from the UK and slap them on an Ampex here and have it work.
However, there are songs from an early period, and I don't know how off the top of my head you find them. I'm sure Google will help you. And you can find overdubbed drums. And I believe is it the Silver Beatles stuff or some of the very early stuff? And there's overdubbed drums that were released. And that's probably, if he did something, what he's talking about. But he's mixing his information up.
Yeah. Now, obviously, once you get a master tape and a master tape that's mastered for the US, stereo or mono, that just becomes source material if you want to do now an overdub on top of it. And so that has potential validity. But he didn't insert himself into any sessions replacing Ringo. Ringo's work primarily happened on the backing track, and backing tracks were almost universally group tracks.
Right.
Onto one or two at most tracks of audio tape.
Fantastic. So there's a little bit more talk about that, but I think we can move on. From Ron says, at what point did the Beatles switch to Fender amps for recording, and what models did they use?
The Fender amps were coming into play during '66 so they were using Fox or Voxes along with Fenders as they were working on Revolver. What were they using? If you guys will be a little patient with me here.
That's okay.
Let's jump into...
Eric, will you pour me a coffee? I got to have my 15th cup of coffee for the day. One of the ones that everyone will probably know of that was in play is Macartney was using the 63 Fender Bassman, the 6G6A. That was certainly in play. Harrison was known to play through it later, kind of took it over, but that was certainly in play. And beyond that, I think they were starting to use twin reverbs at that point as well. Again, let me see if I can just quickly track down a song where that would be in play here. Yeah, they were. Hi Dan. Hi Audrey. Hi everybody. Hi Shauno.
So they were using overall as they got into use. It was the Showmans. It was the twin reverbs that were being used, and then again the Bassman by McCartney.
Did they ever use 65 Deluxes? Because that's a very, very popular amp in session world. No. I wonder who made that famous then. Wonder who made that particularly famous.
Well, before I definitively, just a second here.
This is good. I like being able to check this out.
Well, very early on they were using a narrow panel deluxe. That was actually almost pre-recorded work here, or their recording session. That was one of Lennon's first amps. Was a 15-watt narrow panel deluxe. I
don't know the narrow panel deluxe. I don't know that at all.
It's like Tweety looking thing here. But let me see where I get here. 67 Fender Deluxe Reverb, the Blackface 22-watt, a Silverface 22-watt, Fender Dual Showman Blackface 85-watt, and Yeah, Fender Bassman 50 watt 6G6A. That was the complement of Fenders
Crazy
that they were using.
because I know those twins well. I mean, those are great amps, but they do not overdrive until you crank the schnizzle out of those things. So if they wanted any of those tones, I mean, what do you think? Talking to Revolver, what's the Taxman guitar sound? Can you tell us definitively on that? Because that's a heck of a guitar sound. You know, I wonder what he was driving on that.
Well, let's jump up here. So Taxman, what was in play from my research, we've got 120 watt JVI or JMI Vox 7120. So yeah, it was interesting. They were bringing their stage amps into the studio, and to not to the joy of the engineering team.
Wow.
They'd rather have a more tame amp that they could work with, right? So 120 watt Vox 7120. And there's also the possibility of the 85 watt 66 Fender Showman, the blackface. So those were the amps of choice between Harrison and Lennon, and then McCartney would use the Bassman for both bass and guitar. It had 12-inch speakers in it, so he could use it for the cabinet had 12-inch speakers, so he could use it for either. And there's loads of photos of that period of his Epiphone, leaning up against his Bassman. As a lot of people may know, the solo on Taxman is not Harrison, it's McCartney.
Which is such a great solo. Such a great solo.
Yeah. I have to wonder what that conversation was like.
Do you think it was similar to the Hey Jude conversation during Let It Be, for anybody that remembers that? You wouldn't let me effing play on Hey Jude. Remember that?
And I'll play what you want, or I won't play, or whatever.
Yeah. All that. Tell me what you want me to play, or whatever it is, and I'll play it.
Yeah. It's a terrific piece of work. It's hard to imagine a better solo for that song.
It's amazing.
What people might not know about Taxman was that it originally ended with a vocal. After the second chorus, it ended with Taxman and faded out. Martin, his wisdom, went in and did an edit and did after a mix and pasted the solo section back on to finish the song out, going back into the solo. The solos are identical if you listen to that, and that's the way they did that.
Oh, I see. Kerry says he's seen pictures with the Beatles using Super Beatles in the studio, which would correspond to what you just said about them using their live amps in the studio.
The Vox, if he's talking about a Vox Super Beatle amp, he or she talking about a Vox Super Beatle amp, no. They got the earliest versions of these things, so like the 7120s and that, they were getting prototypes from Vox. So there was no production models like the Super Beatle that were ever in play for the Beatles in the studio.
Oh, I wonder what he's saying. This is just something that looks like them. Yeah,
they're cosmetically, you have to look carefully at a lot of the mid-period Vox amps.
Right.
And I mean, there's a guy out there who I think Ampwares is the site, who has a
Ampwares.
Ampwares, and I think that's right. And he's got like a geologic breakdown of the Vox amplifiers by plate, color, Tolex that they used on it, whatever it happens to be. A very good resource for people that want to get into the minutia of the JMI era Vox amps.
I am on Ampwares now. Am I able to post in a link here? Okay, here it is. Ampwares amp/Vox. For those of you who want to click on the Vox power portion of amp-wares. I just did a quick Google search there. Oh, wow, it's great. It's got AC 100, Mark 1, AC 15, AC 30, AC 4, AC 50, and AC 10.
So I got a lot of questions, not a lot, but my share of questions about the designations that I was using compared to Andy Babbitt's designations for these amplifiers. The primary difference is that I go granular with them. So like this, the AC30s were AC30/6s of that era that the Beatles were using. And it's the same amp that he's talking about. It's just my whole thing was I didn't want that minutia lost in just generally saying, oh, it's an AC30, because as you know, specific amplifiers from specific years have different configurations. They have configurations, especially when it comes to the speakers that were in use. Elanco Blues versus Elanco Grays. All of those little things were why the Beatles sounded the way they sounded, and I tried to pull out that level of detail with what I was doing.
I'm on this guy's site, by the way, and unfortunately, it looks like it's not as detailed as we want it to be. He says he's improving it or something. But I did post schematics for AC30. There's a couple of schematics for those that really want to get in there and check this stuff out. Unfortunately, it looks like his site is being updated. Bad timing for us, unfortunately, and him, because we would have sent a lot of traffic. It is. Hey, so some great questions here. Sinosure Anthem says, what guitar pedals did they use during Revolver? I actually want to know that. That's pretty cool. Was there any fuzz pedals? What were they using?
Yeah. Again, let me just get into my data here. If you guys will be patient with me for just a second. So there were a number of ways that they were able to bring fuzz tones into the recordings. One was these fuzz boxes that the EMI engineers created. So it was a piece of hardware that was custom built by the Hayes guys within EMI. So that's one. They made fuzz distortion boxes that were used in the recordings.
Whoa, hold on, stop. So where do we get these from? Well, what I mean, like, is there an equivalent to it, or is this something that's like a one-off? It's a
one-off, just like their DI boxes. You can't get their DI boxes, We got
to talk to Chandler. I'm going to text Adam Fiore now and be like, dude, you got to make
the EMI fuzz box. And what is fuzz?
I'm actually texting him, everybody. We've got to figure this one out.
Yeah. So what's fuzz? Fuzz is a controlled distortion, right? It's not just a random distortion. It's a controlled distortion. They used the WEM, which is the Watkins Electric Music. WEM Rush PEP box was another one that was in use. So WEM Rush PEP box, yep. PEP. That was another one they used. They used the Vox Tone Bender Professional Mark II, and then the Vox Conqueror amps that they were utilizing had a built-in fuzz tone capability. So any one of those could have been in play in that era to bring that fuzz distortion. Finally, if you want to go out and push this past where we're at with these two volumes and push into 68, they used the Red 51 console and overloaded the preamps and created that Revolution distortion.
I was about to say the Revolution distortion. Yeah, which is a great sound. Hey, everybody watching, there's a great lump of you here. Please like and share, because if you like and share, it lets YouTube know that we're online, because otherwise they don't seem to notify anymore. So please like and share. Although there's a good lump of you watching here. Thank you ever so much for those tuning in.
Thanks, guys.
Oh, sure. Sean, yeah, that's what I do. I mean, like, I'm talking to Chandler now to find out what if they have those pedals or not. If we find out during the conversation, I will let you know. Somebody said that Chandler does make some pedals. If not, I have a very smart guy that I work with who builds this stuff. Oh, he's responded. See what he says. Yeah, I have a very good smart guy who might be able to figure this stuff out. So I love this. I love these kind of conversations. Now, there's a couple of questions talking about while we see if we can find out that information. A couple of people asking about the J160E, and then there's somebody else followed up with what acoustics were used. Now, when I have a funny story. So I was about 4 or 5 years ago. I was with Jack Douglas, and we went to the Gibson booth, and Gibson have a guitar. I can't remember which model it is, Gibson, with a picture, one of John's drawings on there. I think it's a little self-portrait that he did of himself on the guitar, and it's called the John Lennon model. And so I'm with Jack and the Gibson rep. People love to bang on Gibson, and unfortunately I'm only going to make it worse for them. But the Gibson rep was telling us, and this is just funny for everybody. I have a lot of Gibsons everywhere. There's Gibsons everywhere. I love them. Love Fenders. Yamaha, as you know, I'm a big fan of because they're affordable. There's a Gibson over here, so I'm not trying to be that guy who's negative. But cutting to the chase, the Gibson rep goes, this is the John Lennon model. This is the guitar he played doing blah, 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 blah. And Jack said to the guy's face, and I was really trying to help this guy out. So he was putting his foot in his mouth. And Jack is really nice, and he's like, I don't know why you put the signature on this guitar. And the guy's like, well, that's because he used it for blah, 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 blah. And Jack goes, actually, you put it on the wrong guitar. You should have put it, and he went round the corner and pointed to a different guitar. And I'm trying to tell the guy that this is Jack Douglas. He recorded like Double Fantasy and Imagine, and he was one of the engineers on Imagine and Milk and Honey, and he was also one of the engineers on Give Peace a Chance and all this kind of stuff. And the guy could not take his foot out of his mouth. It was pretty funny. So anyway, that's my story. I think it's just a reason why I say it's just an illustration of stuff gets lost in folklore. Like somebody pointed out there, they think that they see a particular amp. Now, it might be on further investigation that it was an amp that looked like another amp. But, this is how things start. Rumors start and then it becomes a fact. So I wonder what was the acoustic guitar that they favored, and if it was the J160E, why? Why was that a favored guitar?
Well, the interesting thing about the Beatles' choice of instruments was that they were never particularly concerned with having the Cadillac of gear. They would get gear given to them, which is a lot of the reason why they used it. Or in the case of the J160s, they got those early in their career. It was one of the first actual kind of professional level acoustics that they brought into play. And then I think like with a lot of musicians, it becomes a force of habit. You get used to playing that instrument. You like what it sounds like. It's familiar to you. That's the guitar you play. So the J160s were played throughout the Beatles' recording career. Harrison later brought in the Super Jumbo in '68, brought in which is the J200. So that came into play, and that became his guitar of choice, acoustic guitar of choice. But Lennon stuck with the J160, and also he and McCartney both played Martin D28s. And then McCartney additionally played the Epiphone Texan, which again it's a mid-level guitar. It's not like the king of acoustic guitars from Epiphone or anything like that. It just, they came upon their gear in very odd ways. The Rickenbacker bass that everyone loves. Why did he play it? They gave it to him.
Right. I think that's a little bit of what happens for a lot of us. I have a tendency, personally to only talk about gear that I know and use. And sometimes people give me something and it's absolute rubbish, and so I don't use it. So I think even though they may have been given that equipment, it had to be good.
Well, it had to be good enough for them to enjoy playing it, or they wouldn't have played it.
Right.
Yeah, obviously. There was Vox gave them some weird, during the height of the raga rock thing that Harrison was doing in 67, 68. They gave him basically a sitar guitar.
Right.
Play this, George. It's a sitar and a guitar. Nah.
I have a choral sitar guitar. Actually, I have hey Arthur, hi Tim, lots of people on here. Hey George. I saw Audrey earlier. Hi Audrey, Diego, Keith, so many great people here. Amazing community here. Roy, Shauno. I have a choral sitar guitar, and I joke about it all the time. It's actually the what's it called? I'm blanking. Who made that? Jerry Jones. So it's actually like a souped up choral sitar guitar, and I have tried to use it 100 times, and I can never, I just can't find a song that it works on.
Yeah, and
that's just me. You know what I mean?
Well, actually, you bring up that relates to a great point, and I don't hope it's not too much of a tangent. Is the Beatles instrumentation in general was really traditional, real traditional pop music. They augmented it with very select touches of, whatever, tambura, tempura, instruments like that during George's, walk through the Indian vocabulary. But they weren't looking for exotic sounds. They used very normal tool sets for rock musicians to create the music they created. It's just that they almost had a standing order of, I don't want, especially later on, that I don't want that to sound like that. I don't want that guitar to sound like a guitar. I don't want those horns to sound like a horn section. I don't want those drums to sound like on and on and on and on. So, with that directive, then the engineers and Martin's producer took those very standard inputs and colored them.
Right. Yep. All right. I'm going to hit you. That's wonderful information. I'm trying to find out about these pedals for people here. So I'm looking down. I'd like to be able to see if we can have an answer. I'm going to hit you with some rapid fire questions. And see, because there's quite a few that I want to be able to get. Okay,
yes, no answers.
Well, just yeah, just because I want everybody to feel looked after, because some of these are probably like. So Diego asked. He's asked a couple of times. I heard that the Revolution distortion was running through 2 stages of mic pre. Is that true? Do you know? Just one.
One.
Just one,
because
okay.
it was direct into the Red console, Red 51 console, I believe. If they did it in Studio 3, I'd have to look up. If Studio 3, it might have been the Red, it might have been the 37, but no, they overloaded one set of pre's.
Right. Justin says, what was their vocal chain? I suppose we have to focus maybe on Revolver. What was the vocal chain on Revolver, for instance?
Well, standard vocal chain was going to start with a Neumann U47, U48 on the front end. That's their vocal mic of choice throughout their career. Very occasionally, an AKG KM56 or 54 would be used. But almost.
So they did use KM56 and 54s on vocals.
Yeah.
Oh, that's nice to know. I have a KM56 here. Yay!
Yay! One more. Did you get your U67 yet?
I had a 67 for years.
That's your Hey Jude vocal sound that we were talking about.
I know. You're killing me. You're killing me. My favorite vocal sound ever is a U67. I don't have one. I had one for years. I hear Nigel Godrich would probably not like me telling this because he never does interviews, so he probably tries to keep. Sorry, Nigel. He probably tries to keep all of his information to himself. There's certain guys that don't do interviews, you know. But a friend of mine who will remain nameless, who did a lot of Nigel's, has done a lot of recordings with Nigel, shall we say, studio-wise, says that he uses 67s on everything. Like he just takes a 67, puts it on the vocal, puts it on the guitar, puts it on the acoustic guitar, puts it on the electric guitar, puts it on overheads. So there's something about a U67.
Well, that was Glenn Johns' approach to Let It Be. U67s everywhere.
Which is great because I love Let It Be is one of my favorite sounding records.
Yeah. But back to the vocal chain. So the vocal chain would have been the U47, U48. It's going to go through a RS-124 All-Tech compressor. I think you've got a somewhat similar era All-Tech compressor there somewhere.
Right.
Customized for EMI. They customized a lot of their gear to make it meet their standards. That was going into the Red console, either a 37 or a Red 51 console. That might have been hit on the back end with a RS-127 presence box, which is a very discrete equalizer, and then out to Studer J47 tape.
I am copying in somebody at Chandler and None, see if I can get them online if they've got any answers.
Where's my fuzz box?
And I've called him out, so if he doesn't go on now, we can all tease him. We had somebody, we had a live Q&A the other day, and Mike, and he might be on now, I'm afraid to talk, Mike from Mac DSP was on. And we were like, hey, Mike, you're online. Are you going to give us some free plugins? Oh I mean, it's great. I'm very glad. Yeah, exactly. I'm very glad that we have these companies involved because, you know, it's great that everybody gets to help each other out here. Okay, so I'm going to keep going. Questions. Yeah. Okay, so Paul Lucas says, I read that they had open hours for sessions at Abbey Road. Are there still songs that were never released? What do you think?
Well, I mean, no one's heard Carnival of Light, which was just a little experimental noise piece that they did for an art show in '67 in the Pepper era. No, there's not a wealth of undiscovered Beatles material out there. It's in general, it's all out there.
All right, Adam says he's logging on. Adam, are you there? Adam from Chandler is logging on. Okay, so you don't think there's a wealth of songs? There's just probably that one. Tim says, did the Beatles have any guitar techs?
No,
they were just looking up.
I mean, if you want to call Mal Evans a guitar tech,
right?
No,
so they didn't have like a guy that was or a girl that was sitting there like working on the guitars and setting up stuff for them.
In fact, fast forward to John Lennon playing with Elton John, and doing the live thing with Elton John. Davey Johnson from Elton John's band was John Lennon's guitar tech.
Wow.
So,
that's amazing.
So Davey Johnson in whatever this is, 76? Did
what recording?
When they did the live thing at Madison Square Garden, I saw her standing there.
Whatever Gets You
Through the Night was the single that they did together.
I want to say 75, but you might be right.
Yeah, 75,
it's one
76.
of those things I used to know. It could be 74, 75, or 76. 76 feels too late for me, but I could be wrong.
It is too late. I think
because he took 4 or 5 years between records. And then, there's people here that will know. Here's a great question from Graham. I like this. This might not be a quick answer. Sorry, Graham, I just lost it. Graham said, what is the most surprising thing you found out while researching the books?
Well, as I go through, there's surprises for every era. There really are. When you and I talked earlier, one of the big global ones is how much the band played together. When you think about modern recording and how we'll isolate the performances to get ideal performances. There's a lot of it's almost like the group ethic is lost in a lot of modern recording. And the Beatles played a lot of their music together. Even as they moved it up into 8 whole tracks that they could use in 1968 on, they were still doing, group performances, group overdubs. All of that was going on. So that for me was an eye opener, especially in the context of modern recording.
Right. I think that's a big deal. I'm looking at messages here coming in thick and fast about this, which is great. Yeah, I think that's a big deal. I mean, obviously for me, going back to what we were just talking about 10 minutes ago, the 67 on the vocal, I always assumed it was a 47 or a 48. So that was a big eye opener. Bass Nerd Question says, Adam, how much did they use in the Rick in the studio versus a Hofner?
Well, the early recordings up actually through Help are either the 61 or the 61 Hofner or 62/63 Hofner. Another quibbling point there for people that are like, well, what is it, a 62 or 63, his later bass? It's actually components of both of those years that make up McCartney's classic bass. So it's technically a 62/63 bass. That was played through Help. It came back in Let It Be, obviously. It came back for some of Rubber Soul. There's Robert Rodriguez, another Beatles author, makes a pretty good case for it showing up in Rubber Soul a couple of times. But starting with Rubber Soul, heavy on the Rickenbacker, almost exclusively up through 68, when about halfway through the White Album, he started playing a Fender Jazz.
Okay,
and that only lasted through the White Album. And after the White Album, Fender Jazz goes away, he's back to the Rickenbacker again.
Oh, interesting. I'm a big jazz fan. Now, did he ever use Precisions?
No.
Yeah, never used Precisions.
I love Fender Jazz. Oh, nice bass.
Merrin just says, it's just a one title answer. He just says, what is the one Beatles song that you would love to redo or remix if you had a chance?
Oh. Well, the one I'd probably, for me, it would be the stereo version of This Boy.
Interesting. Why is that?
It's a bad mix.
Oh,
it's in the contemporary stereo version. You listen to it, the band almost completely disappears, and all you have is the vocal stacks, which the song's about the vocals, but I just I like balance in a mix, and the mono version is nicely balanced. And you get to the stereo version, it's just vocals. So cool. Yeah.
Robert Hunt says, to what extent is the huge room at Abbey Road responsible for the sound of these classic records?
Studio One, which was the largest studio there, was in play probably the least of all studios for the band, and because of the scale of it. I mean, it can hold Warren, you've been there. It holds a massive orchestra. And now they can. And actually, I'm not even sure to the extent that they can shorten the acoustic space in one. I don't think they can, other than close miking and kind of localized baffling. Studio 2, you were able to actually bring in these movable walls and shorten the acoustic space for a rock band. Studio 3 is an intimate studio in the first place, but Studio 1, it had a huge impact if you think about things like the orchestrations for A Day in the Life, all done there. But it wasn't the studio of choice. Studio 2 became like the Beatles studio. That was the one that they used the majority of the time.
Sure. Yeah, I've definitely seen most of the photos from that period. Two things. First of all, Adam Fiore from Chandler is in the chat. And Adam, maybe you can answer this in the chat for us. Jerry was talking about, what was it? It was distortion devices, fuzz devices made by EMI. And we want to know, does Chandler do Abbey Road, the combination of you two of you, do you make that? Are you going to make that? And the other one was the DIs, which actually came up in the conversation last time. The DIs that EMI made, are those also available or going to be available or already, do they already exist? We would love to know because they keep coming up in conversation, but I'd never heard about the fuzz pedal before, or the fuzz circuitry, I should say.
Yeah, fuzz circuitry. I'm not sure if it was just a box in the chain or if it was a pedal.
I'd be excited to know. So, Adam, do you know the answer to those questions? Or are we sparking off a business opportunity for you? Sean says,
give him my address when you're done with all this.
I will do.
A business opportunity.
Yeah. Sean says, Let It Be vocal mics look different than Neumann's. What were they using for vocals on Let It Be?
Well, if he's talking about the gooseneck microphone,
yeah,
that's an AKG C30A, and it was mainly used for broadcast television. The profile of the mic, it's a condenser microphone. The profile of the microphone with that gooseneck was really narrow, so it didn't get in the way of the face of the star, right? And so that was the purpose behind going to those mics. They were making a film. Now, they also used, if you look at the footage, Apple Studios footage. So let me clarify a little bit. Those AKG C30As were in use at both Twickenham for the movie work and Apple Studios for the recording work. But Lennon would use the KM56s for his vocals, or the U67s for vocals were also in play at Apple Studios for the actual work that shows up on the recordings.
So George says Paul sure did use precision, but then he says that John and George often played bass sixes, like in the Hey Jude video.
Yeah, Fender 6, which is a bass guitar. It's just the scale of it is, the scale of it, and it's a 6-string bass. It is a bass. They played that guitar, right-handed guitar. McCartney might have gone to a precision after the Beatles session. There's no evidence of that I've found of precisions in use during his term with the Beatles. Right.
Yeah, George. If there is, but just let us know. Be intrigued to see what song you're saying that he used a precision on, or songs. Zach says, I heard the story where John sang into a mic that was in a glass jar, or is that folklore?
Well, when they were doing Yellow Submarine and trying to figure out how they get these submarine sounds or underwater sounds, they played with the idea of putting a mic in a glass of water and then singing through the glass to the microphone. They ended up using a combination of a oscillator and a low pass filter to actually generate that gurgly sort of tone.
Okay.
And in Yellow Submarine, Ringo blows bubbles into a glass of water. That might be what he's talking about as well.
Right. Thanks for that. Richard in the UK says, did they mic the amps from a couple of feet away? Oh, amps, sorry. Did they mic the amps from a couple of feet away and not right up to the grill?
The type of close miking that was done during the Beatles era wasn't the way that we handle it in modern studio close miking. They were a couple of feet from the grill. And there's photo evidence of this. And when you're using a large diaphragm mic like a U60 or U67 or U47, U48, which they did on their guitar cabinets, the pressure that can be exerted by super close miking would just eat up a microphone. So they're taking care of their gear too. There was some ambient miking going on, which was one of the secrets to Norm Smith's sound for the early Beatles recordings, like With the Beatles, Please Please Me. He had a U47 in Omni mode that was just out in the studio that was picking up the sound of the whole band together. And at least on Please Please Me, they didn't use any sort of baffling or isolation between the cabinets. They used different microphones, a U47 on John's, KM56 on George's. As they moved to dissimilar amplifiers, then they didn't care so much of differentiating the microphones. They would use a U47, U48 on both of them, because just a more sensitive mic as far as the attenuation goes.
Fantastic. I'm reading. It says, Chandler's, I'm here. Google Beatles effects pedal on EMI Fuzzbox. Mal was their roadie. Learning to set intonation string height is not that hard. Yeah, Darren, yeah, exactly. I'm sure they would do it themselves. I'm surprised to find Ringo sang on Boys while playing drums. Is that true?
Yeah.
I suppose he must have. There's not much you could do.
Yeah, no,
there's tracks.
Yeah, and Ringo, they didn't allocate Ringo a whole lot of studio time to get his work done either. Ringo was given a lot of just a nod because he was very popular. He was a very popular member of the band. But, Ringo's songs are a lot of 1 and 2 take efforts. And maybe that was Ringo. I think being driven by Ringo, but
I've always thought Boy, especially for an early song when he wasn't really a trained singer, was really good. Around the world, better than I could have sung it.
Well, as you get on into where they're writing songs for Ringo, you'll find that a number of songs, and I noted in the books, are like 5 notes, which is essentially his scale.
His ranks. Well, they knew. Hey.
Yeah, they knew what they're doing.
I mean, to be honest, it wasn't emo records. Most of them find out they were like, ever gonna be together, paper. Yeah, all the choruses used to be like 2 notes the whole time. The whole time. I mean, every Blink 182 song, God love them, is all just kind of here all the time. And sorry, Eric, I know you're a huge fan. I'm not putting it down. I mean, it's just stating the obvious. You can write great songs with 2, 3, 4, 5 notes. The first big Linkin Park song is that's the chorus melody. Everything you say to me. Big, successful, popular songs can have limited ranges.
Absolutely.
And I always was a big fan of Ringo's voice. But as being a fan of a band, you end up cutting all kinds of slack. But I actually thought he was a great singer, especially Boys. If he's playing that with drums, he's already way ahead of me. I'll ever be. Yeah,
and again, I think that it reinforces, and especially in those early recordings, the early era stuff, a lot of that is live with just a touch of overdub performances, but backing track and vocals all together. Because the Beatles had cut their teeth and actually became the Beatles by playing so many hours live. They continued to be a very well-rehearsed band prior to recording. So, boys and girls, don't forget, practice makes perfect. It truly does. And they're an example. Warren, we've talked about previously. If you get your hands on the Nagra reels, which is the B-roll audio from Let It Be, there's about 80 hours of it. And you'll see that in any one day that they were at Twickenham working on these songs, developing these songs, they would play them 35 or 40 times. They'd go out of a day's work and not having committed anything to tape, and they'll have played the 3 or 4 songs they were working on 120 times between 3 or 4 songs. I mean, think about that. It's your band rehearsal next time you're moaning.
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely. I think it's absolutely incredible, and that's something to definitely be remembered. Let's see if I can get through some more of these questions. Live recording captures the nuance of the performance. Basically, talking about that. Somebody's asking about compression, what they used. They're saying was only the Fairchild. Now, we know that it wasn't the Fairchild, obviously. In fact, actually, Jeff Emmerich at one point, it's probably in his book and everywhere, made a big point of saying he barely used the Fairchild. Not barely, but didn't use it as much as people thought. He used, I have a real one up here, it's hiding, an Altec that's been modded. I have the Altec mod that has the EMI mod on it, but you can, as in Chandler's online here, you can buy those Abbey Road, what do you call it, like Abbey Road authorized versions of the Altec with the mod on it, and just go to Chandler and check it out. And yeah, I've used them, and they are fantastic. And everybody who knows that gear says they're very authentic. So ultimately, I believe, and I could be wrong, but I'm going to paraphrase it, and Jerry's going to correct me. You know, a lot of the time, the D19 would be, or a U47 or a U67 would be plugged into one of these devices and then just moved around, capture this, capture that, you know. And Jeff was working, he was 19, 20 years old, working his butt off, capturing stuff, you know, left, right, and center, and just moving the mic to a different situation. So it's got used a lot. So those chains got used a lot for recording.
Yeah. So the three front ends of the chain for them with the microphones are going to be mic selection, whatever that is. You know, U47, U48, D19C. You know, very common. KM56, very common. That's either going to run through their version of the Altec compressor, which was the RS-124. Or it was, in the early days, it was a Fairchild 116 limiter, and then later on a Fairchild, I think 660 or 666 limiter. And you know, limiting being high ratio compression was typically allocated to drums. Not necessary for really anything else. But Warren's correct. Mic gets set up, chain's already established, and we're getting work done. I mean, if you've ever seen, I'm trying to think of the name of the documentary, but it's Lennon recording Imagine. He's recording the Imagine album at Tittenhurst, his home studio.
Yep, I know it.
With Phil Spector. Not a pleasant guy in the studio.
I wasn't going to say anything.
Yeah, not a pleasant guy. He rides the engineers so hard that you can only imagine that, hey, if I got a live mic and Lennon wants to record something, I'll just get it over there and get this recorded, or I'm going to get yelled at. You know, again, the level of...
The stakes are high in a studio. I mean, they are. And, you know, I have a personal studio, you know, which is very professional. It has SSLs, it has Pultecs, it has Neumanns and RCAs and AKGs and all the things that you want. And we have the drums set up at all times. We have a 64 Ludwig off, ready to go with mics on it, a vocal mic setup, which is a U47, and all the other things ready to go, because that is the way. I've done this my whole life, my professional career, and you have to be ready.
Yeah.
When a singer, especially singers, especially, I'll say especially 50 times in a row, especially singers, and even when they're not singing, just the mentality of a singer is, singing is far more personal than playing bass or playing guitar or playing drums. You are bearing your soul. So if you've got a singer's mind and you're a front person, front man, front woman, whatever, you want to have something available to go at all times. And I get it. You know, you're creative, you're in a space, you've got an idea, you want to be able to do it. So yeah, to reinforce what you're saying with my experience, that's the way it's got to be. I did a session with David Foster only like earlier months ago. There was a Diane Warren song with David Foster as the producer, and I came in 2 days before the session in Diane Warren's studio and set up all the drums, mic'd it all up, got tones, set up the piano, mic'd it up, had ready to go, got the vocal mic, vocal booth built. And when David turned up, we started at 12. He got in at 11:59. was on like exactly on time. The band sort of came in a little bit later, and we were just recording the moment that he asked to be recording. And it's, you know, regardless of personality type, you know, whether your artist is nice or not nice to you, that's part of our job. Yeah. Our job is to be ready to go. And I think that, you know, I get lots of people debating me. I'm sure you hear it as well. Like, oh, you know, artists are this and artists are that. And it's like, yeah. And your point is? I had somebody the other day going, oh, you know, working with artists is so frustrating, you know, because they're this, and this. And I'm like, and what exactly is your point? I mean, that's an artist comes in and they're really insecure about their art and their music, and they need us to be ready to go. So Jeff's experience is very rewarding. I mean, I actually love the book. You know, I think it's worth the Jeff Emerick book is worth reading. I think Glyn John's book is definitely worth reading. I'm a big fan of.
Didn't you get that book from the library or something? Is that?
Yeah, you know the story.
Yes. Sorry, I had to do that to you.
All right, I'm talking too much as usual. Let's get through some more of these Academy questions. Thank you, everybody who loves our community. Yes, the Produce Like a Pro Academy is amazing. And for those of you that are either members or going to join or whatever, we're doing this again for Academy members only. There'll be less people on, or maybe more, who knows, because we've got 1,100 members. We're doing that again at 3 p.m., which is Pacific Coast time, 3 p.m. Darren says, and it's a great compliment, this is the only thing on YouTube that makes me feel like I'm stealing when I watch for free. Thank you ever so much. No, I like that. It's a great comment. I know. Well, you know, we do those like 5 tips videos. I've seen people in each of those 5 tips videos make 5 videos from it because they're trying to milk it out. You know, to me, it's like, isn't the whole idea of having a real community is you just give back, give information, introduce us all together, get Jerry on here, have a Beatles discussion, talk about recording. Why does it all have to be like, here's a 2-minute tip and give me $500 and you can get to hear the discussion? That doesn't make any sense to me. I grew up poor in a nice area, so I have a nice way of speaking. But my dad is a painter. He's an artist. We had zero, nada, nick, no money, and I had to work really hard to get this. And so I want to give back to people. So anyway, what makes Tomorrow Never Knows sound so much larger than the room space is if it occupies an infinite space. Well, firstly, it wasn't recorded at Abbey Road, was it?
Well, parts of it weren't. The backing track was. I believe they started in Studio 3 with it. Right. If you'll one more time to give me a moment here.
Sure, look it up.
Here we go. First session was in Studio 3, and that's where they established kind of the bed of the percussion. McCartney's really monotonous bass, all of that. That was in Studio 3, but all of the loops and special effects that come into the song were done at each of the band members' home studios. So Lennon and Harrison and McCartney all had these Brenel 2-track home recorders. They were quarter-inch recorders, and they were McCartney had started to get into sound collage and was exposed to a lot of the avant-garde at this era of his development. And he brought that kind of sensibility into the studio. The Beatles at home were privately playing with collage and tape loops. And they would make the loops. And essentially what a loop is just, it's a fixed length of audio tape that you cycle over and over and over again. The length of the tape creates the length of the repetition of the loop, obviously. So they were recording these 1- and 2-track loops at home and doing all sorts of outrageous things with them. So, for instance, the seagull sound that you hear in Tomorrow Never Knows, that that goes on in that song, that's McCartney laughing, sped up super fast, and ends up sounding like a seagull. There are there are guitars that don't sound like guitars because of how they've been manipulated. Sitars recorded backwards. There's a piece from I think here, I've actually, I have the information right in front of me here. If I'll dig into it and find it. So there were 5 tape loops that ended up. They brought in about 8 to 15 loops to start. They sorted through them with Martin kind of going, that won't work. This will work. They ended up with what's been identified as 5 different loops for that song. So why the song sounds like unlike anything else was that it was partially recorded at home. It was and that was performed into the tape by having machines all around EMI, like 5 machines now, because they couldn't use the Brennels. So we got 5 machines coming in to the red desk, and now we were working them live to bring them in and out of the mix. And that's what you're hearing. They could never recreate Tomorrow Never Knows because like all old mixes, it was a performance. So any of you that have worked on tape and worked in a studio that your session wasn't the only session going on, you realize that every time you did a mix, it was a performance. You might have 2 or 3 guys on the board in order to bring things in and out. I'm talking automated faders and all that sort of pre-automation. Your hands on that board making and performing that mix, and they did that to bring in the elements in. So what do we got? McCartney's Laughter is sped up to sound like a seagull. We've got a B-flat major chord from a Jan Sibelius orchestral recording. There are 2 sitar parts that are played backwards, and the miscellaneous mellotron tones. So you can pretty much, McCartney's Laughter. McCartney contributed. We know that he brought in the orchestra recording, the whom that comes into it. The sitar parts, Harrison contributed. And the mellotron tones, Lennon had his own mellotron at his Kenwood studio. And so wow,
I want my own mellotron at my studio.
They make a modern mellotron without all the tape hassle. So
I've seen that. It looks beautiful, but isn't it just basically like sample playback in a box?
I think you have a firm argument there.
Yeah, it looks great though. I think, yeah.
Yeah, if anyone doesn't know what a mellotron is, it's tape loops that and tape stretches. So that's another piece of gear that, oh my gosh, the maintenance on a mellotron must just be no thank you.
I've used them. Paul Santos. Does everybody know Paul Santos here? He's plays guitar. In fact, he's a multi-instrumentalist. He plays drums, bass, guitar, and keyboards with the Aerosmith guys. He does like a lot of. He also engineers, and he engineered for just some stuff with us on the last Aerosmith record. But he's like kind of their main guy, and he has so much incredible equipment. I know he was selling some recently, but he, when we were working, brought in a mellotron, and I'd used mellotrons in other studios back in the early '90s. I remember A&M had some mellotrons. They probably still do. A&M's now called Muppets, Henson. But when I first arrived, it was still A&M, and I remember that was their problem. You know what I mean? The engineers and the assistants had it all worked out while we were tracking. But when you bring in a real mellotron into a session, and it's your problem, boy, caramba! I mean, I was the guy trying to make it work, and we were like, oh.
Yeah.
Especially when they're like 40 or 50 years old.
Yeah, it can be a very big problem.
It was a lot. So there is definitely a good case. Ice Mike says, this is super awesome. Thank you, Produce Like a Pro, for letting us get this good knowledge. And he goes, I don't know if Jerry can see this, but please thank him for sharing his experience.
My pleasure, guys. Happy to be able to join your community for the day. Absolutely.
Okay, so I'm trying to go back. Okay, so talk about loops, mellotron, proving the revolver was a step in the change of progression as a Beatle as opposed to Pepper. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think most fans of the Beatles would say that Revolver was the first, like, well, Rubber Soul was a huge change for them. Obviously, we're talking about with experimenting with stereo, but Revolver definitely is like a massive stylistic change.
Yeah, and with Revolver, what you see with Revolver that you don't see earlier, and I'll back my view up here. Revolver is where they really start using tape reduction, meaning they're trying to go beyond the 4 tracks. Up to Revolver, they're pretty solidly with I think the exception of Help. They're not using tape reductions. They're not expanding the number of tracks available to them by doing premixes along the way to open up more tracks for performance. But in Revolver, they really get into it. Sometimes there's up to 2 tape reductions going on, meaning they filled up the 4 track and now they bounce it down and open up more tracks, and they filled up that 4 track and they bounce that down to open up more tracks. So
right.
So that's a huge change in the approach to how we're both approaching the recording, but also how we're thinking about what we want to hear in these songs. And what they wanted to hear went far beyond the 4 track all of a sudden when it came to Revolver.
Absolutely. Well, this has been absolutely amazingly fantastic. Would everybody watching please do me the favor and like and share this? This has been amazing. I really, really appreciate you all. Thanks for tuning in. One last question.
There we go.
Okay. These are the last questions we're going to do. Using the technology today, do you think the Beatles would sound better or different? It's an opinion piece.
Oh, yeah. I mean, listen to Double Fantasy. Listen to McCartney's work. McCartney's still doing good work. Chaos and Creation, fantastic. New, fantastic recordings. Yeah, the Beatles always used what was at hand to make the best music they could. And if they were recording today, you can bet they'd be full on digital, and they would be exploiting it to the degree that made sense for the songs. Granted, McCartney has a lot of old gear that he loves to use, and he's bought a lot of the EMI gear for his own studio, but he's not a troglodyte. And it'd be hard to make the argument that they would either be frozen in time as the Beatles, or that they would back up when they had different opportunities now.
I agree. Frame Junkie says, would you consider Sgt. Pepper to be the first prog rock album?
No. Sgt. Pepper to me is a pop album. It's a pop album.
Right.
Sorry.
Although Mark says Canterbury thanks Sgt. Pepper's. And that's probably, I'm not sure if that translates, but all the prog that we grew up listening to in the UK is called the Canterbury scene. There's so many great bands. Okay. Sorry, Narrow Path, that you're catching us at the end. Thank you, everybody. Before you go, please like and share. That would be absolutely amazing, so that people on YouTube know that we did this wonderful video. I'd really appreciate it. Thank you ever so much. For those of you that are Academy members, come back at 3 p.m. Somebody asked me, Titus says, is it okay to ask about your fee structure? It seems to be great prickly mystery when the walls of the world of artists are great. You know what? I don't have a one-size-fits-all. It really depends on what the song is, how long it's going to take me, whether it's production, engineering, mixing, playing on it, co-writing. People ask me all the time how much I charge for things. I don't have a one-size-fits-all. Anyway, thank you ever so much. Have a marvelous time recording and mixing. If you're an Academy member, come back at 3 p.m. PST. We will do this all again for Academy members. Thank you ever so much. You have been absolutely incredible. It's going to, James and everybody, this will be live. It usually takes YouTube about 20 minutes or half an hour to figure this out, doesn't it? Yeah, it takes them about to re-up it. So it's going to stay up. So please leave some comments and questions. I will get Jerry to answer questions. Jerry, one more plug for your book.
Yeah, well, Beatles Recording Reference Manuals, Volumes 1 and 2, available now. So there's the new one. McCartney's on the cover. 65 through 66. Dig it.
Okay, marvelous. Thank you, everybody. Have a marvelous time recording and mixing.